the book is similarly pink and green. I like those colours together. I find them both cosy and uplifting, and those two states, I think, are most important to life.
Nigella Lawson, of course, talking to Jenny on Friday's edition of the programme. You can hear the programme in its entirety on the website, of course, and on Radio Player, but we do have a little bit more from Nigella and the pleasure of food later in this edition of the programme. And of course, she cooked on Friday poached salmon salad, and the recipe is on the Woman's Hour website, bbc.co.uk/radio4/Woman's Hour. Now, this month's edition of Elle magazine has a strap line across the cover. It says it's the mag's annual feminist issue, and it's the third time this glossy magazine has done that. The star of the film Suffragette, Carey Mulligan, is the cover star, and with Elle this month you can get a free nail varnish. And there, I suppose, in a kind of giveaway nutshell, is the conundrum. Can women's magazines truly embrace feminism whilst keeping all their customers and their advertisers happy? Lorraine Candy is the editor of Elle, and Lisa Smozarski is the editor of Stylist, which is given away free every Wednesday in 11 major UK cities. Lorraine discusses here the use of the word feminism in the glossies.
I think young women are more active, more activist. I think they're really interested in equal rights. They want to be paid the same. They want to be treated fairly in the courts. They want to have proper childcare. They want to be able to talk about what they believe in and what they think is right for them. And they're very much working in groups at the moment. There's a real collective feeling around women, which is what we're focusing on with this issue.
And there are many women who fit into all those categories and also would like a free nail varnish.
Yes,
no denying that.
I get really cross when people bring this up because...
But it's inevitable that we do bring it up.
Yes, it is. Of course, it's absolutely inevitable. But that's like saying you can't be a female scientist and care about what you wear. It really patronises women, and it makes us feel as if we can't have areas of all interest in our life. The point of a fashion magazine or any magazine is to talk about things women are interested in. My business model is to give women what they want when they buy the magazine. That's why we sell it for £4.
But you've got to give the advertisers what they want too, and there are lots of advertisers.
That's classed as the business model. We're a luxury fashion magazine. We couldn't produce it without luxury fashion advertising. I have to say, luxury fashion advertisers love feminism. They've been incredibly engaged with our campaign. We're asking people to tweet pictures of women that they work with and women that support them, and we've had some of our biggest advertisers tweeting pictures alongside it. It is a moment, it is a zeitgeist. I think we should use it, and I really do think it's very powerful for young women to see change and to want change.
I've always enjoyed Stylist, Lisa. It's an interesting magazine precisely because actually you have always talked about careers, you've talked about aspirations, you talk too about global issues affecting women, don't you? Alongside some lovely pictures of great clothes and things you might want to buy.
That's right. When we launched 6 years ago, we built our DNA around the fact that women want lots of different things from the magazine. And Stylist really was about recognising that actually you can be a serious career woman, you can care about politics, you have an opinion on feminism, you like fashion, you adore makeup.
But when Lorraine says things like feminism's having a moment, or perhaps it was me that said that, I mean, you can understand why some feminists who've been fighting battles, some pretty unfashionable ones, for many, many decades, they get a bit angry about that. They don't want to hear that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think when we launched, actually, it was interesting because actually feminism was quite quiet 6 years ago. And as we came through, the likes of Catelyn Moran were putting their books out, and actually we saw that the trend really did start to grow and grow. Now, I don't think that's something we should be regretful about. I think it's fantastic, actually, that because feminism had been rejected by so many young women for so long because it had a bit of stigma attached to it or a label attached to it. And actually, just by having young women who are role models back in the market talking about feminism has been really quite productive. And that varies from the likes of Catelyn through to Laura Bates with Everyday Sexism.
Of course, what you could have done, Lorraine, for your feminist issue is put a photograph of Emmeline Pankhurst on the front page of Elle, and you've got Carey Mulligan, who's one of the stars of Suffragette. Did you think about doing something like that?
No, I didn't, because I have to sell a certain number of magazines every month, and I know that Emily would not sell as many as Carey. I mean, if I don't have a magazine, I can't put any of these features in, so I have a business to fulfill, and I have to do that. I'm not a politician. We're not here making any specific political points. We're just saying young women want to talk about it. Here are some facts. and ideas that you could discuss. This
Right.
is a good language which to use.
How do your feminist issues sell in relation to your others?
Oh God, Emma Watson was one of our biggest selling issues in my 11-year
and that,
history.
I mean,
of
and that
magazine. It was
is
extraordinary.
That's a great illustration of. I mean, Emma Watson is a seller of magazines. She's an absolutely beautiful woman. But you associated her with feminism, and the magazine still sold.
Yes, absolutely sold. And also, we had our biggest Twitter following for a campaign. We had 130 million people engaged. The reach was 130 million on Twitter with the feminism campaign around that issue, the He for She campaign. So it is something women are really, really interested in. It's a real moment, and we need to capture that enthusiasm and get all that information out there and tell everyone what has happened in the past and what every other feminist has been working on. I think it would be a real shame not to be able to feature that in the Gospels.
So it's a tough message then, Lisa, but it's in a pretty box with a nice bow. Is that sort of where we're at with feminism in the magazines?
Well, I think it's probably counterproductive to think about it like that. As Lorraine said, we create magazines that need to be appealing to our readers, and of course we have to design that in a certain way and present that in a certain way. That doesn't mean that just because you're interested in fashion and beauty or that design is good, that actually the message is weakened or diluted. And I think actually the fact that we are able to have very powerful platforms to talk about these subjects is incredibly important and ensures that the feminism discussion lives on.
Just very briefly, another tweeter here says, Glossies, you're not part of the solution until you just use plus-size models as standard without making it a feature. I mean, Lisa, you take that listener's point, because most of us are not clearly never going to be models. We don't have the build, we never will have, we never have had. Why can't we look at women who look a bit like us?
We do, and we would argue that we do actually. We do make sure
Rebel
we use
Wilson on the cover this year. Rebel Wilson was size 22. So, I mean...
But she's also Rebel Wilson.
Yes, but it gave her a platform to talk very openly and honestly about her body, how she feels, about her image, about glossy magazines. We aren't excluding women of different sizes and shapes. We have to put famous women on the cover because you, the consumer, won't buy the magazine otherwise, and then we won't have a magazine.
Can we end with a confirmation from you both that when feminism ceases to have its moment, you'll keep plugging away and keep putting it in the
I can
magazines?
tell you that for certain, because when we started 6 years ago, we went out to our advertisers first and then to our readers and said, we are a feminist magazine. That moment hadn't started, but those values were absolutely essential to what we were doing at Stylist. They will never go. We're having a dialogue with women who are interested in equality, and that's what feminism is all about, really.
Lisa Smazarski of Stylist and Lorraine Candy of Elle magazine. An email from Annabelle who says, I can't believe the Elle editor was saying that the advertisers are interested in feminism. I was offered a job by a well-known male designer the other day. As he was offering me it, he said, but you can't wear your hair like that if you're going to work for me. Luckily, I was in a position not to take the job. If I'd been younger, I'd have accepted it and taken the comment on board. From Lucy, I wish women's mags would stop adopting the word feminism. I can't help but feel it's hypocritical and just a clever marketing tool. I hadn't read female-orientated magazines for years. I couldn't actually afford them, and dipped back in with Stylist on the tube because it's free. I found myself encountering more of the same stuff from my early 20s. Like almost all other women's magazines, it did not make me feel empowered or represented, but rather inadequate and exasperated. Lucy, thank you very much, and you know what you can do. If you have a view and you want to express it, then email the programme anytime you like, and I can't emphasise enough that we love hearing from you, particularly if there's something you want us to talk about on the programme and you don't think you'd hear it anywhere else. Now, you may well have read recently about a group of young women who claim they were denied entry to a nightclub in London because they were told they were too dark-skinned or overweight. The club in question is called District, and the owners deny any sexual or racial discriminatory policy. They say the women concerned have been there before, and they only ever deny entry when the club is full, and on the night in question they say it was fully booked. What's going on here then? Do any clubs in this country, which overwhelmingly play black artist music, routinely refuse entry to people because of skin tone or weight? How dare they? And if it happens, how do you challenge it? Zalika Miller is one of the women who says she was refused entry to District. Rennie Edo Lodge is a journalist who specialises in covering gender and race relations. Rennie told Jenny she wasn't surprised that this appears to be happening.
There's this term that's been doing the rounds on the internet for the past few years called misogynoir, which is, quite a catchy term to describe when racism and sexism sort of collide. And this was something that's happening predominantly to black women, less so guys. And I think what happened to the girls at District is that they were told that they were too dark and too fat, allegedly. I don't think that a promoter would have said that to black men, that the size of their bodies or the way that their bodies looked had any influence on whether or not they would be able to be going into the club. So I'm absolutely not surprised. I think all women are subject to particularly Eurocentric beauty standards, and black women are as well, and there's been a long history of colorism, particularly aimed at black women, where light is right and dark is wrong.
So Zalika, what was actually said to you that night when you were queuing?
Well, it was myself and my friend Lynn that was dealing with the promoter. She went and spoke to him after we were told we weren't allowed in the club by the door girl, and he said to her, it's because they're too dark. And then she was like, but you saw pictures of them, so what's the problem? So he tried to then sort it out, and then after a while we just gave up. We said it was enough. We've been waiting outside for quite a while, and that's when we left. And as we was leaving on our way home, that's when he sent her the text message saying, you and your friend are okay, but the other two were overweight.
Now, we did ask the club, of course, and the promoter to take part. We didn't have a response from them. But the club has issued a general press statement in which they deny any racism, and they say it was just because you hadn't booked and the club was fully booked. What do you say to that?
The club opened at 10 o'clock. We got there at 10:15 to avoid a situation like this. And my friend was invited down by a promoter. So the fact that we got an invitation, he reached out to her on Instagram. There was no need for us to book. As they've also said in their statement, we have been there before and I've never put my name down on guest list ever to go into District. So their whole statement was very flawed.
Really, why is there this colorism, as you described it, this standard of beauty applied based on the shade of a woman's colouring? I mean, promoters make a distinction between what they call chocolate and caramel.
It's absolutely disgusting. To find the answer of why, we have to look at the standards applied to all women of all races. And when you look around your magazines, I was walking down the street on my way here this morning, all the pictures of beautiful models tend to be white. It's only in recent years that we've seen a bit more of an explosion in darker skinned black models. I've watched many a television programme where the only black person is somebody who's many, many shades lighter than me or racially ambiguous. These are about the standards that apply to all women, and some black women in some countries are bleaching their skin to achieve them. Yeah.
How then, Zalika, would you describe the type of discrimination you felt you faced? Was it misogyny? Was it racism? Was the term misogynoir that you used?
I think the reason why it's had such a response is because it's everything. There's a little bit of everything in there. It's not only racism, there's discrimination, there's sexism, there's so much in it. It's touched everybody. So there might have been a white lady that got turned away because she was overweight. That's why everyone has responded so well to it, because it's not just one thing. If we could just pinpoint it to one thing, then I don't think it would have affected so many people. It's happened to me before, and it's almost like I became immune to it. It didn't really bother me, but that was the last time I was like, this is enough, it's too much.
It's not new, is it? I remember Peter Stringfellow years ago saying he didn't want fat women in his club, which would have banned me from whichever club he was running. So it's not a new thing.
No, it's absolutely not new. And again, I think it's about so many different forms of discrimination. You've got to ask, who are these club owners and club promoters? Who is that space supposed to be for? Because if you're telling women and black people that you can't come in unless you fit these standards, is this a space for everybody to go into and have a good time and enjoy the space with their friends? Or is this a space for men to cruise where only good-looking girls are allowed access to that space? Is this a man's meat market? Because these informal policies suggest that.
But they are privately owned clubs, though, Rennie. with strict admittance procedures, and they have to have bouncers. I mean, they have to control the safety side of things as well. To what extent do they have a right to choose who goes in?
Well, I mean, I might be reaching here a little bit, but I actually think that this is an indication of the kind of hard-to-catch, subtle discrimination that happens in many private companies. Now, a couple of years ago, the Runnymede Trust and the BBC did an undercover investigation with a private lettings agency, and they pretended to be a landlord who explicitly said to the letting agency, I don't want any black people to rent my property. And so then the BBC sent one black man and one white man to go and discuss whether or not they wanted to rent the property. Black man went first, he was told no. White man went next, and he was told, yes, of course, you can come and view it. And so, you know, I might be exaggerating, or, you know, this might be hyperbole, but actually the privatisation agenda is going to see, like, if this continues, we're going to see more of these kind of incidences where you can't catch this kind of discrimination because they're not as accountable as public bodies.
To what degree do you, Zalika, think you have to agree to be judged by them, or take them up for breaking the law?
I don't think it's right for anybody to judge another person on the way they look. Make it a members club only then, make it a private members club only. There's a lot of clubs in London where it is private members only, and you can only get in if you know a member or if you're a member. So that's what they should do. If that's how they're gonna do it, and they're saying that it's up to them, they can decide who they want in their club, then make it a private members club.
Zalika Miller and Rennie Edo Lodge. This from a listener, Neil. I've also witnessed discrimination against dark-skinned women in nightclubs, he says. I'm 44, and frankly I'm well past the age where I'll be going clubbing, but as an Asian male, I'd like to point out that discrimination is not limited to women by their size and skin colour. In my clubbing days, me and my Asian male friends would often be refused entry to clubs on the grounds that it was full, or we weren't on the guest list, when we could clearly see white guys who'd arrived after us getting in. In fact, there were clubs that we wouldn't even bother trying to get into, as we were told they would never let Asian guys in. Strangely, black men never seem to have a problem getting in. I think many nightclubs have a hierarchy of who they let in, with white women at the top, and Asian men and dark-skinned or overweight women at the bottom. Neil, thank you very much for that. Interesting perspective. A recent tabloid review of Miss You Already, this is the film about breast cancer starring Toni Collette and Drew Barrymore, and we mentioned it on the programme a week or two ago, said men would have to be dragged to see it. You see, that two female protagonists in a film that celebrates female friendship, so nothing much for men here. And yet women are still supposed to lap up a bromance and find all sorts of male bonding a cinematic hoot. Back in 1991, Thelma and Louise was really quite something. A film where two women tackled a car park rapist, they gave a leering lorry driver what he deserved, and then they brilliantly flew off into the sunset to avoid all the men who were trying to catch up with them. It really did feel, watching that something might be about to change. Women were the headliners, doing things that, on the whole, women didn't usually get the chance to do on the big screen. Well, did anything change? Gina Davis played Thelma. Susan Sarandon, of course, was Louise. And this week at the BFI Film Festival, Gina talked about her foundation, the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media. Here she is telling Jenny what she thought the result of the success of Thelma and Louise would be.
When we were making it, nobody had any idea that it would strike a nerve the way it did. Absolutely. We just hoped people would see it. And it was stunning, the reaction that it had, both with the audience and in the press. You know, a lot of editorials, good and bad. You know, oh my God, now women have guns, everything's been ruined. The press very much predicted now things have changed. And we're going to see so many more movies like this. This has really struck a nerve, and there'll be more female buddy pictures and road movies and whatever. So I thought that sounded true and expected that. The next movie I did was A League of Their Own, which got a very similar reaction in the press.
This was about the baseball.
Which was about baseball. And now we're going to see all these female sports movies because it was a very big hit. neither of which proved to be true.
But you were very young. It was early in your career when you made the film. What did you learn from Susan Sarandon, who was obviously much more experienced than you were at the time?
Oh gosh, so much. She just changed my life, really. It was such an incredible role model because I didn't know that many women who were that self-possessed and self-confident and comfortable with themselves. And from the very first meeting that we had, I started learning things from her.
And what did you make of Brad Pitt being the eye candy rather than the women being the eye candy? We all loved it.
Right. Well, I actually thought it was kind of great that we had broad spectrum of male supporting characters. There was everybody from the cute one to the noble one, and obviously all the way to the rapist. But he was very sweet.
Didn't Ridley Scott spray him to make him look more shiny?
Well, yeah. So we had this sex scene together, basically, and really shooting some close-ups of Brad, and he personally is spraying Evian water on Brad's abs to make them show better, and I'm like, excuse me. Well, okay, that's fine.
So you had been a model at the very start of your career, and then your break was with Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie. What did you learn from him?
Tootsie was my first job, actually, and as you can imagine, to have your first job be with Dustin Hoffman and Sidney Pollack as the director was pretty astounding. He actually is very mentory and really took me under his wing and taught me so much about everything about the business and acting in film and
fighting off unwanted attentions, as I recall having read.
So Dustin said, when you go to Hollywood, your male co-stars are likely to hit on you, and you shouldn't sleep with your co-stars, so here's what to say. I would hate to ruin the sexual tension between us. So I store that away, and then turns out later when I do move to Hollywood, I meet Jack Nicholson, who is kind of, coming on to me a bit, and I say, well, I'm sure that we'll work together someday, and I would hate to ruin the sexual tension between us. And he said, oh my God, where did you get that line? I didn't tell him it was Dustin Hoffman.
Now, you talked about getting older and roles drying up. What happened?
Well, it's what happens in Hollywood, and by the time I started in the sort of mid-'80s, I knew that was a phenomenon, but it was a time when Meryl Streep and Sally Field and Glenn Close and everyone had these incredible movies coming out every year. And I thought, well, if they're going to fix it, I don't have to worry about it, and it won't happen to me. And I was getting some really incredible parts, but I was averaging about a movie a year up until my 40s, and in my 40s, I made one movie. So it wasn't that I wasn't getting offered anything at all, but far fewer good, significant parts.
Why then did you form your Institute on Gender in Media? That was 2006.
Yes, well, that was in response to watching children's programming with my then little daughter. When she was a toddler, I started watching, children's movies, videos, and things on TV for kids. And I think because I played some roles that were significant to women, I immediately noticed that there were far more male characters than female characters in what we're making for kids, which made absolutely no sense to me that in the 21st century we would be, in effect, teaching kids that girls are less important through what they see. And I didn't intend to take it as far as I did, but I found that nobody else was noticing this. Particularly people in Hollywood, people making the entertainments. When I asked around, the most common response was, that's been fixed. That's not, no, that's not a problem anymore. And that made me think, well, if I get the data and the numbers I'll find out if I'm right, and also maybe that will make a difference. And it has. It's made all the difference in the world.
Now, I spoke recently to Drew Barrymore and Tony Collette about Miss You Already, the film that they've just released. And they both have their own production companies, and I wondered to what extent now are women having to just do it for themselves? Get your own production company, do the films that you want to do.
Well, it's a great thing for people who can do it. They have the status where they can do it, and the ability. It's not easy by any means. Getting any movie made, no matter what movie it is in Hollywood, is very, very, very difficult. And it's not an easy solution by any means. It's not the answer to the problem, because
what is
the difficulty of getting movies made. The answer is that in the mainstream commercial films that are made, we need more female characters. We need more women in front of and behind the scenes. It has to just become normal to expect that half of the population of the movie is going to be women.
Gina Davis talking to Jenny on Woman's Hour this week. Now, it's back to university time, of course, or Freshers' Week time, or maybe just after, at universities all over the UK. Now, it's generally assumed that university or student days can be the best time of your life, but the truth is, for many people, that it's not as instantly fabulous as they may have been led to expect. Many, though not all students, can feel quite isolated and really out of their comfort zone at the very start of their student life. We talked this week to two university students, Meredith and Kirsty, who were very honest about what they'd been through.
It's a very different style of academics to school, and you might go from the top of the class to the sort of middle of the class. You're sort of average amongst a class of really clever people. You have to sort of find a new place to fit in.
You're in a position where you don't want to let your parents down. You certainly don't want your friends to know that you're struggling. And we call it thresher pressure, but honestly, you don't really know these people very well, and you want to be seen as you've got your stuff together. You don't want to be the one which is struggling,
Meredith and Kirsty. We talk later in the week to Ruth Caleb, who's the head of the counselling service at Brunel University in London, and to Nicola Byram, who's the founding director of an organisation set up to help students in their time at university called Student Minds. This is Nicola telling me about her experience of uni.
I came to university with a bit of a track record of mental health difficulties, but I arrived at university feeling like I was in quite a good place. But I struggled at uni, and I felt the kind of pressures that the girls were talking to you about yesterday, of really feeling a lot of stress and not feeling that necessarily I could talk about it. But around my second year, and I've been struggling for quite a while, my housemate just took me aside and said, "You're not okay, what can I do?" And that was really life-changing for me, because it opened a conversation. And when she'd opened that conversation, I realised actually the more I started talking about my mental health, the more I realised that other people were feeling equally alone about their mental health and the stresses they were facing. Which really felt quite surreal, that we were all feeling very stressed and like we couldn't talk about it. And as we started talking about it, you realise, hang on, we can talk about this because we're all going through the same thing. When you start talking, actually you realise that you're not alone, and that makes a huge difference.
But surely the hardest thing of all is to admit that you need help.
Yeah.
Nicola, where did you get help from?
When I was at university, it was help from my friends and peers, and I think the kind of stresses that a lot of students are facing, before we got to a point where there's perhaps a more substantive mental health difficulty, the real help you need is to know that you're not alone and you can talk about these things. And I think for a lot of students, when they start talking to friends and peers about the struggles they're facing, some of those struggles just become a little bit smaller. It becomes easier to manage, because you realise, actually, this isn't overwhelming. I'm not the only person in the world going through this. Other people are feeling the same thing as me.
Does every single university, Ruth, have a counselling service which is easily accessible to students?
Almost every university has a counselling service. I think there are one or two who don't, but they're very much alone. Virtually every university recognises how important it is to have a professional counselling service.
Well, we asked yesterday for emails on this subject. Loads came in, and thanks to everybody who bothered. But, this is quite interesting from a listener who talks about her daughter being a very normal, very sociable girl who is immensely popular at home, but she doesn't drink. And that's a very simple, practical problem. And so much of this early stuff at university, Ruth and Nicola, is based around alcohol. Nicola, what do you do if you just don't drink?
It's really interesting, actually. A lot of the students that we work with at Student Minds perhaps echo that, and quite a lot of them don't drink. I think it takes a while to find a niche for yourself, but there are plenty of students at university that don't drink. They're certainly not isolated individuals. I'd encourage students to find their students' union and look at other activities that are going on. Lots of universities have quite large student unions, lots of, say, volunteer type activity going on, other things that you can be getting involved with, and other niches, other groups of people that perhaps aren't so focused on the alcohol.
Nicola, when you first talked about your problems, was it I'm guessing it was to a female housemate, was it?
Yeah.
Right, perhaps that's relevant, perhaps it isn't, but it doesn't surprise me that it was another woman. What about young men, Ruth? Are they actually more vulnerable than young women?
Well, I think that it's generally recognised that they are more vulnerable. There's a far higher suicide rate for men than women, and we need to understand that men might find it far more difficult in the first instance to allow the fact that they have mental health problems or just emotional problems or are just upset. And that's something that I think universities work very hard to try and reduce the taboo against mental health difficulties. I would say to parents out there, try very hard to make your homes into a place where mental health can be discussed easily.
I was the first person in my family to go to university, and I think that's an experience common to many, many people. It's sometimes even harder in that position to confide in family and say, I don't like this.
I think sometimes there is a sense of some sort of failure, having not thrived in the early days of university, although actually you're changing your life, so it's extremely common for people to feel out of sorts, a bit odd, and making friends can sometimes be awkward, and I think that's something that we don't think about very easily. You don't go out making friends when you're at home quite often. They happen organically, and many of your friends have taken 10 years to become close to you.
Which you sort of forget, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know, Nicola, do people still open up a conversation with the old classic, what grades did you get in your A-levels?
I don't think so.
Oh. No wonder I didn't get very far. Anyway, carry on.
But it is a real challenge, I think, in those first few months, especially when you are struggling, that you want to seem like everything's going okay, and it can take time to sort of to settle in and feel like actually these are people that I want to spend a lot of time with. And I think one of the things that's such a huge challenge in those first few months is to put everything in perspective and to sort of go, okay, this isn't the be all and end all of everything in my life. These relationships, they're not that important. They're relevant now, but they don't have to be that important in my life.
Nicola Byram and Ruth Caleb, and there are links to a number of support groups who can help with these kinds of pressures on the Woman's Hour website, bbc.co.uk/radio4/Woman's Hour. Loads of emails on this from people, many of them actually just saying, that's what I went through, that's what I'm going through, that's what I hope my children avoid going through. So thank you to everybody who got in touch on this subject. This email, though, stood out. We'll keep it anonymous, but here we go. In order to prepare my younger son for uni, I abandoned him in the January of his A-levels by going to Bali to see my energy master for a month. I ended up staying for 3 months, as I was doing what was right for me. There was a lot of healing needed. My heart felt like it was breaking from the length of separation, but I was actually breaking the tie/attachment and letting him go. He had a freak out for 2 days, then he understood what was going on. He had to do all his own shopping and cooking, etc., and studying. When he arrived at Halls for his first year, sharing with 10 other people, too many to bond with in my opinion, he was the only one not homesick and coping fairly well, though I must admit he did nearly leave that first term. Right, thank you very much for that. I've never been on any of those sitting on hot rocks kind of experiences, but maybe I should give it a whirl. Give my children a glimpse of what it might be like to have a little break from my catering possibilities, which brings us on neatly to our next dose of Nigella Lawson, because obviously she was a big guest of the week, so we want to spread her all over. this edition of Weekend Woman's Hour, like a chocolate spread. So here she is discussing food and pleasure, and this is really because, let's face it, for most of us, particularly most women, the family cooking is just a treadmill. It isn't really something that brings us a huge amount of sensual pleasure. So here is Jenny talking to Nigella and the food writers B. Wilson and our old friend Diana Henry. This is Diana telling Jenny how she tries to make cooking a pleasure.
Cooking for my children night after night is difficult, but from a very early age, it's the joy of making things. I mean, it wasn't just food when I was little. I like making collages and that kind of thing as well. So there is it's the kind of creativity that we can have every day.
How much is this new book a narrative of your life now?
Well, it is, but all my books are. I mean, I think that the recipe is a highly charged autobiographical form, and I think it's impossible to write about food, one's own food, without telling the story of oneself, one's family, one's connections to other people, and to oneself. I think that is very important. But I think Anna's right. There is a creativity, and I think that is a simple creativity. Why a lot of people don't enjoy cooking is because they see a lot of chefs cook in a complicated fashion, and they don't understand that actually sometimes choosing what herb you might sprinkle on a chicken and how you deglaze the pan up at the end, whether you put in a bit of vermicles or some chicken stock, or maybe orange juice mixed with lemon juice, all those things can add to one's pleasure. And I do think as well that the modern world particularly is lived an awful lot in people's heads, and there's something so wonderful about the physicalness of cooking as well as how inspirational it can be.
How would you achieve that balance?
I think it's very hard, and I think we do need to be honest about the fact that both eating and cooking are not a pleasure for millions of people, partly because many of us bring a huge amount of unhappiness to food. I know I used to be one of those people myself in my teenage years. I compulsively overate. It was partly a response to living with my sister who was anorexic. And I've got to a much happier place about food, and I'm thankful I did it before I had children, because, as Nigella said, you absolutely do not want to pass on any...
But don't you think it's cooking that helps you? I mean, I think that cooking really does help with a lot of difficulties around food, because partly because also cooking is about control, and that's always underplayed.
For me it does, but I think there are lots of people who bring guilt to the process of cooking, and that's something I'd love to see changing. Women put themselves down, they act as if what they think isn't important. And I think the thing with healthy eating, I mean, maybe we want to reject this word healthy altogether, balanced eating, let's say, is all too often, and I think women maybe are more prone to this than men, we see healthy food and pleasurable food as two separate things. And
you see, I'm sitting here feeling extremely virtuous at having tried this lovely salad and thinking healthy, balanced. And I'm looking at the chocolate cake and thinking, I really want some of that chocolate cake. And thinking, but Diana, how do you deal with that? You know, the things that we're not supposed to have, the naughty but nice.
I think it's a disaster if you ever start to think of it in that way, because I've struggled with my weight all my life, and I probably started worrying about it when I was about 6. And if you get the idea that there's good food and bad food, and good food that you shouldn't have, you want the bad food in the first place. And once you do that and you start managing, it's not good. So you need to think, not in those terms at all, but to think about your intake broadly across everything that you eat should be balanced. But you should not feel, guilt's terrible. I mean, I worry when people talk about obesity and shame people about it. It's not going to do any good at all.
But we do have an obesity crisis. How do we deal with it?
We do have an obesity crisis, but on the whole, it's people eating not real food. It's very much easier to consume enormous amounts of processed food. It's sold in big quantities, and I think also the more involved you are with all the process, you don't need to get so much out of that end bit. But can I just go back to say that, you say that you think the salad is virtuous, the cake is what you want to eat, and please do. I feel I make that salad because I love the taste of it. Now, and I also like the taste of this cake. But I always notice that I have people at supper, I never make them eat what they want. So generally the people who won't eat cake, we've all had our slice, and they're just cutting thin slices off the cake until they've had about 4 slices. So it doesn't work.
Denial is a bad thing. And there's the wonderful phrase Diana used for the title of one of her books, The Change of Appetite. And I think that's how you get there. It's learning new appetites. You get to the point where looking at salmon and avocado and pumpkin seeds, you just think that just looks wonderful.
But you said a very important thing there, Nigella, when you said the process of cooking actually feeds you before you've even tasted anything.
We're all getting older around this table. Sorry to remind you. How do you keep enjoying food as we age and health and taste it?
I find I can't eat as much. One of the things I find about getting older is I just can't be having the pea bowls, you know. I just can't do it. It's uncomfortable. I don't sleep. I can't eat meat very often in the evening. I'm full of salads. I mean, I do if I'm going to stew. But so I feel I do eat less naturally. And I suppose as you get older, you really want to feel as vital and alive and as well as possible. So I think the focus isn't so much about am I going to fit into those jeans. Not that I have to say that's never been a major focus in my life. Always prefer the food. But I think that, and maybe you just make, you need, in different parts of your life, in different stages of your life, you need food in a different way.
Nigella, as I age, I can't eat as much either. Except that Nigella left a chocolate cake in the office on Friday and strangely did find my appetite returning. In fact, the whole thing had gone about 25 minutes. It was hugely embarrassing. My colleagues did not excel at restraint. Let's end with something uplifting. It was National Poetry Day on Thursday, and Jenny talked to the poets Ruth Padell and Helen Mort, and to the Radio 4 presenter Andrew Marr, who was in charge of We British, an Epic in Poetry. Andrew told Jenny about important 16th century female poets he'd been researching for the show.
Amelia Lanier, for instance, devotes her main poem to a frontal assault on the biggest problem I think women had in the 16th century. Very, very religious, intensely religious time, when the main charge against women was that through Eve they had brought sin into the world. That was what the Protestant preachers were saying again and again. And she confronts this head on and saying, absolutely not true at all. It was Adam who was to blame, and you only came into the world through women's pain. You should remember that. You should stop being so cruel. You put aside your sovereignty. You're all rats. And it's a great poem, which I'll try and find.
Yeah, try finding it. You must read us at least a little bit of it. Helen, who's your first choice?
One of my favourite poets is Agnes of Vincent Millay, who had writing in the 1920s. She was somebody who was very inspiring to me when I started to write myself. And I love her work because it's very witty, it's very irreverent. I think if you think of people like Robert Frost as being the master of the sonnet form, for instance, but Millay was a fantastic sonnet writer. And some of her work, I love the fact with all poems, one of the best things about a poem is that a great poem you can memorise and you can carry it around in your head. And some of her pieces, like First Fig, that's a poem that I always carry around in my head with me.
Can you give us a taste?
I can probably remember the whole thing. It goes something like this. My candle burns at both ends, it will not last the night. But my foes and my friends, it gives a lovely light. And I've always cherished that as a piece, not just about how you should or could live life, but about poetry itself. Poetry is a kind of condensed thing, and as a blaze, I guess.
Sappho, I think, is your first choice, Ruth.
Yes. I mean, she is such a mystery, and she's so wonderful. She's so flagrant, she's so fragmented, she's so sparkly. You know, the moon is set and the Pleiades, the watch goes by. I lie alone. I mean, and it was so mysterious because the whole history of classics and classical scholarship after her, there she is, the 6th century, there's lots. They have her, they quote her, they revere her, and yet they can't touch her.
I did look in my old anthology last night. I still have it on the bookshelf. And I found only Elizabeth Browning in there. Wonderful, but the only female poet in, alright, it was the 1950s, early 60s. To what extent are women still excluded from the anthologies?
I think the anthologists, particularly of the 20th century, are heavily to blame. If you go back over proper collections of poetry from almost any century, you find a lot of women poets, and a lot of them are very, very interesting. And then something goes odd in Victorian times, they get excluded from the anthologies, and they are forgotten. It's a very, very salutary lesson. If you're not in the anthologies, you do get forgotten.
It's a British thing, because if that was an American anthology, you'd have Emily right up there.
Have you found
I
this
found this
naughty
now.
poem?
It's not a naughty poem, but I just want you to think of. So this is the age of Shakespeare. Men in their bulging codpieces, lots of Puritan preachers on every street corner, on every church, saying women are to blame for sin. And she has just written a poem demolishing that, and it ends like this: Then let us have our liberty again, and challenge to yourselves no sovereignty. You came into the world not without our pain. Make that a bar against your cruelty. Your fault being greater, why should you disdain our being your equals, free from tyranny? If one weak woman simply did offend, this sin of yours hath no excuse nor end. That's Emilia Lanier.
Oh, yes, we have to learn that one by heart, don't we? And Ruth, you've got Claudia Rankin in your choices.
Well, I was interested in Claudia Rankin because she's just won the Forward Prize, and there are so many poets that we're all so influenced by, and there was Emily Dickinson or Elizabeth Bishop would both be my choices, but I haven't read Claudia Rankin before she won the Forward Prize, and it's really interesting following on from your last thing. It was a book about racism, and I just it's about all the little tiny things, and poetry is so good at having the tiny things, making the tiny things big, condensing them and whooshing them out. And so here's something: the world is wrong. This is sort of somebody who's just experienced a tiny flash of racism on somebody's face in a pew or something like that. The world is wrong. You can't put the past behind you. It's buried in you. It's turned your flesh into its own cupboard. Did that just come out of my mouth? His mouth? Your mouth? Did I hear what I think I heard? Do you remember when you sighed? I think she's so interesting. I mean, you liked some of the stuff about the tennis players, didn't you?
Oh, I liked all of it, but yeah, I think the way she discusses Serena Williams and the way that she's been perceived, and the idea, particularly the way that her anger is perceived, I think was really interesting. I think it's a great book.
We did start out by saying that women have been neglected in the canon, but it has to be said that the three kind of poets laureate of recent years, Caroline Duffy, Gillian Clark, Wales, Liz Lockhead, Scotland. What's been the impact of that, would you say, that those women are right up?
They're doing wonderful things. They connect so much with their communities, I think is one thing. Women are very, very good at doing that. And these women, and their words are as well. I think it's changed, I think when I published, a sort of landmark book for me in 1998, Rembrandt Would Have Loved You, which was sort of turning the male convention round of looking at women. So it was a woman, it was Love Book of Love, it was looking at a man. At that time, I was the only woman poet in Britain who was edited by a woman. And now we have Chatto and Windus is publishing Helen, and all sorts of wonderful younger women who are winning prizes like Helen has and so on. So that's changed from 1998 to now extraordinarily.
How much do you feel it? It's a better environment to be doing it in now.
Well, I have to say, one of the first books of poetry I bought with my own money when I started buying poetry books as a teenager was Ruth's book, Rembrandt Would Have Loved You, and I feel like now there are so many opportunities. It's wonderful to be part of a list at Chatto and Windus that has a female editor and publishes lots of women, and to be part of a list, the next generation, which has more women than men on it.
Helen Maud, Ruth Bedell and Anne Lamar. Join me on Monday morning for Women's Hour. We're discussing, amongst other things, whatever happened to the mothers' names on marriage certificates. Are they there? Are they going to be there? We catch up with that issue on Women's Hour on Monday.
Weekend Women's Hour was presented by Jane Garvey, and the producer was Rebecca Noor Mohammed. Evan Davis and his guests will be discussing the corporate crisis at Volkswagen following the emissions rigging scandal. The bottom line is in half an hour after Saturday PM, which is after this.
I hope Queen Victoria doesn't mind this car parked in her ballroom.
Peter Snow's DeLorean takes us through time.
Peter, we should be about to spot an intruder. at the heart of the palace.
10 companions journey with Radio 4's Time Traveller.
Starting in the dark satanic mills of the Victorian age and forward to the far future.
The MP, Alan Johnson, is the first to connect our world with times gone and to come. Peter Snow returns to the future this Monday to Friday at 1:45 and then available on the Radio 4 website.
Now on Radio 4 at 5 o'clock, it's Saturday PM with Glenn Campbell.
Geoffrey Howe, the former Chancellor and Foreign Secretary, has died. He was the mild-mannered minister whose resignation speech triggered Margaret Thatcher's downfall.
It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their backs have been broken before the game by the team captain.
Mark Mardell looks back at his life and will talk with two of his cabinet colleagues, Ken Clarke and Michael Heseltine. Turkey's declared 3 days of national mourning after 86 people were killed in the deadliest bombings in the country's history. We'll have the latest and discuss who might be behind the attacks. Plus a show of strength as North Korea celebrates 70 years as a one-party state. Steve Evans has been watching a slightly surreal day.
Hello! Hello! Hello, hello, hello!
And in the rugby, a win for Scotland. Can Wales do the same? We'll bring you a half-time update. The BBC News is read tonight by Zeb Soames.
Margaret Thatcher's longest-serving cabinet minister, Geoffrey Howe, whose scathing resignation speech was widely seen as a key factor in her downfall as Prime Minister, has died. He was 88. Lord Howe held the posts of Chancellor, Foreign Secretary and Leader of the Commons before announcing his resignation in November 1990 amid disagreements over Europe. Sean Lay looks back at his life.
Geoffrey Howe was no orator, yet with a single speech he brought down one of Britain's longest-serving Prime Ministers. He'd been close to Margaret Thatcher almost from the moment she became Conservative leader. As her Chancellor, he implemented tough policies to bring down inflation. His handling of the economy helped secure the government's re-election. At the Foreign Office, he negotiated Hong Kong's return to China. But he fell out with Mrs. Thatcher over Europe, and in a devastating resignation speech, he accused her of isolating Britain in Europe. A week later, she too had resigned. As Lord Howe, he campaigned for Britain to join the euro. Their differing views on the subject ensured the rift between them was never healed.
David Cameron has paid tribute to Lord Howe, describing him as the quiet hero of the first Thatcher government. Sir John Major said Lord Howe's political convictions had transformed Britain, and he now deserves the credit so often denied him in life. 86 people are now known to have died in 2 large explosions at a peace rally in the centre of the Turkish capital Ankara. Almost 200 were wounded. Video footage shows the marchers singing songs, hands joined, at the moment the bombs went off. Our correspondent Mark Lowen reports from Istanbul.
It began as a protest calling for peace, and then this. 2 explosions ripped through the crowd beside Ankara train station, at least one believed to be a suicide bomber. The protesters were demanding an end to the violence between the Turkish state and the Kurdish militant group, the PKK, which resumed in July after a 2-year ceasefire. The government has blamed terrorism for the attacks, but the leader of the pro-Kurdish HDP party says the state is responsible, alluding to a so-called deep state that's often talked of here, pro-nationalist groups either colluding with or supporting the state.
Israeli troops have shot dead 2 Palestinian youths during clashes close to the border with the Gaza Strip on another day of violence. In Jerusalem, there have been stabbings, attacks on Israelis. Both took place at the Damascus Gate entrance to the Old City. Several people were hurt. Police in Dublin say 10 people, including 5 children and their parents, have died in a fire at a traveller's site on the outskirts of the city. 4 others are being treated for smoke inhalation. Coletta Smith reports.
The fire service say the blaze at the travellers' site in Carrick Mines, just south of Dublin, began near prefab units and spread to others around it. The damage was so severe that a number of the bodies are still at the scene. It's understood that the 5 children killed in the fire were all under the age of 10. The youngest was a 6-month-old girl. Irish police have begun investigating the cause of the fire. The 10 people who died were from 2 families who'd been living at the site for the past 8 years.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un says his country could defend itself in any war started by the United States. He was making a rare public speech as part of mass celebrations in the capital Pyongyang to mark the 70th anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party. Tanks and missile carriers formed part of the vast military display, which also involved thousands of soldiers marching in tight formation through the city's main square. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have marked World Mental Health Day by spending time with young people who've been affected by the illness. During a visit to some workshops being run by the charity Mind in London, Prince William said it was a huge topic which needed to be talked about more. Rugby, Scotland have beaten Samoa 36-33 at St James's Park to secure their place in the knockout stage of the World Cup. Wales are currently playing Australia at Twickenham to determine who wins their group, and Wales are leading 3-0.
It's 5 minutes past 5. He was the longest-serving cabinet minister under Margaret Thatcher, yet he's best remembered for his devastating resignation speech that precipitated her downfall as Prime Minister. Lord Geoffrey Howe, the former Chancellor, Foreign Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, has died from a suspected heart attack at the age of 88. David Cameron has led the tributes, saying the Conservative family has lost one of its greats. In a few minutes we'll hear live from Lord Heseltine and Ken Clarke, but first here's Mark Mardell, who was a young political correspondent when Geoffrey Howe left government.
There is one central irony in Lord Howe's career. He was the dead sheep that broke the Iron Lady. So mild-mannered, grave, considered and ponderous that Dennis Healey, who himself died last week, characterised being attacked by him in the Commons as being savaged by a dead sheep. Yet it was his calculated, withering resignation speech which destroyed Mrs Thatcher. He was by nature loyal even after he was demoted from Foreign Secretary to Leader of the Commons, with the sop of Deputy Prime Minister thrown in. But for years there have been signs and leaks and rumours of a profound disagreement over whether Britain should join the European exchange rate mechanism, the forerunner of the euro. It didn't exist, didn't have a name then, but it was Mrs Thatcher's insistence Britain would never join a possible single European currency, no, she said, that led to him resigning from a cabinet he'd been in from the very start. Sitting in the reporters' gallery, I watched spellbound. It was the single most dramatic Commons moment I can remember, before or since.
I no longer believe it possible to resolve that conflict from within this government. That is why I have resigned. In doing so, I have done what I believe to be right, to my party and my country. The time has come for others to consider their own response to the tragic conflict of loyalties with which I have myself wrestled for perhaps too long.
And then something so devastating you could hear the sharp intake of breath from MPs around the House.
It's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their bats have been broken to call the game by the team captain.
We knew really that was that. Within a day, Michael Heseltine picked up the dagger. Before the month was out, we had a new Prime Minister. Geoffrey Howe didn't exactly have a humble background, but neither was he a member of the elite. He was born in South Wales in a mining area, his father a coroner, his grandfather a union man. His path included Winchester School, law at Cambridge, and serving as an army officer in East Africa. As a budding politician, he wrote a paper saying the trade unions had too much power. It was suppressed by the One Nation Tory hierarchy. He first became an MP in 1964, lost his seat, won another one, was appointed Solicitor General, the beginning of more than 20 years on the front bench. In 1975 he stood to become Conservative leader, stressing his belief in capitalism and compassion.
There are some people who think, quite wrongly, that Tories are born with horns and cloven hooves and tails and so on. I spent the first 2 elections of my life fighting in my hometown in South Wales, rebutting just that impression. I've done a tremendous amount of work in connection with the social services. I think that's the other half.
That got him 19 votes, but the victor, Mrs Thatcher, gave him the top job of Shadow Chancellor, a huge responsibility as the new leader promoted a more aggressive, less consensual politics. He was behind a new policy statement that promised restoring hope and confidence, a return to common sense, a country living within its means with lower taxes, making the point that they were unblinkered by the socialism of their opponents. When the Conservatives came to power, he doubled VAT, set about delivering a series of hugely controversial budgets. As inflation was curbed, unemployment rose. This was the budget of 1980.
It is not enough to speak of the importance of monetary policy unless one is prepared to carry one's words into practice. The Bank of England are accordingly rolling forward the supplementary special deposit scheme, or CORSET, by 3 months on the existing basis. In addition, the bank are announcing this afternoon an increase in their minimum lending rate by 2% to 14%.
The following year's budget was even more divisive, its strict monetarism dismaying the Tory left, or Wets as they were known. 364 economists wrote to the Times, claiming it threatened the UK's political and social stability. After that, the other top job near the pinnacle of politics. In 1983 he was moved to the Foreign Office. His patient negotiations with the Chinese over the future of Hong Kong dismayed some campaigners for democracy, but he reached an agreement that he said provided safeguards.
The essential guarantees are that these propositions are contained in a binding international legal agreement that represents the highest possible commitment that two sovereign states can enter into with each other. And above all, the fulfillment of the agreement is in the interests of both sides to that agreement. China wants as much as we do to ensure a stable and prosperous Hong Kong. It will be a remarkable achievement for China as well as for Hong Kong.
But behind the scenes, the rows with Mrs. Thatcher were growing, over South Africa, but mostly about Europe and the ERM. He and the Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, both threatened to resign at the same time over the issue. She agreed to their demands, whisked him out of the Foreign Office in 1989 and made him Leader of the House. He gave TV a permanent place in the Commons, but seemed a diminished figure without much power. He defended his apparent lack of verbal vigour on Desert Island Discs.
I think that a lot of leadership, particularly in today's society, can be advanced by being human and approachable and calm and not too melodramatic. I think at the same time a politician has got to be able to make the dramatic speech at the party conference. I've not done too badly at that either. But on the whole, I like being thought of as someone whom people can get on with.
But he could not get on with Mrs. Thatcher, at least politically. He said she had a nightmare vision of a European continent teeming with ill-intentioned, scheming people, and he thought her beating of the nationalist drum was dangerous.
The tragedy is, and it is for me personally, for my party, for our whole people, for my right honourable friend herself, a very real tragedy. The Prime Minister's perceived attitude towards Europe is running increasingly serious risk to the future of our nation.
But after her death in 2013, he was gracious about Lady Thatcher and downplayed their many disagreements. But he did concede perhaps he got on her nerves.
My relationship with Margaret Thatcher lasted 15 years, starting in 1975 and ending in 1990. That's longer than most marriages last, and probably it was at its best at the beginning. My manner of argument, I don't like shouting at people, whereas I was trying to adapt to some extent. I think that can be quite irritating if you're a quiet, consistent badger. That doesn't always please the person who prefers badger baiting.
Dryly witty, ever studiously polite, but Lord Howe did bring down the Prime Minister the Conservative Party still looked to as its greatest leader. Why he did it is a reminder of the danger inherent in their divisions over Europe, but also a reminder of how much has changed. It's hardly possible to imagine anyone resigning from today's cabinet because they wanted the Prime Minister to retain the option of joining the Euro, or indeed any closer union.
Mark Mardell. Well, let's talk more now with two of Lord Howe's former cabinet colleagues, the former Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke, who's in Nottingham, and the former Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Heseltine, who's in Oxfordshire. Lord Heseltine, the Prime Minister has described Geoffrey Howe as a quiet hero. Is that how you remember him?
Well, I remember him in many ways. Of course, I knew him from the 1950s, much longer than David Cameron. So we all have our ways of remembering him, but he certainly was quiet and he was a hero.
Well, you succeeded him, Ken Clarke, as Chancellor. You were one of his successors, but he was at the very beginning of Margaret Thatcher's economic revolution. It was controversial medicine, but did it work?
He was actually responsible for the turnaround in the economy that was the big triumph of the first years of Margaret Thatcher's government, and it was hugely unpopular and difficult at the time, as Mark Mardell was recalling a minute ago, but it worked. The 364 economists were wrong, and I don't think Margaret in later years ever fully appreciated how much he'd been the engine room of what she achieved, and it was his absolutely dogged, quiet determination to do what he'd spent a long time thinking about and believed to be the right thing to do in the national interest to give us a proper, healthy, modern economy. It was his sticking to that, putting up with all the flack, that actually began what was the Thatcher Revolution, the good bits of it. And, I think he deserves all that praise.
Lord Heseltine, was he ever ill at ease with the social consequences of some of his economic policies, including high unemployment?
Well, of course he was. He came from South Wales. His cradle of politics was born within a really short period of time and distance from acute examples of social stress. And Geoffrey cared. I mean, all his life he'd been a one-nation conservative. He was instrumental in the formation of the Bow Group in the 1950s, and from that moment on, I knew him in all those circumstances. He did care passionately about these things. But you see, just as we've heard in recent speeches by the present Prime Minister, caring is about trying to find a solution, and a solution doesn't exist in simply pouring taxpayers' money into a position that the taxpayer in the end can't afford. So you have to find more constructive solutions, however difficult they may be in the short term. Geoffrey found them, and Geoffrey was rock-like in the way in which he buffeted the economic storms in order to make success possible.
Ken Clark, we mentioned that Denis Healey, his predecessor as Chancellor, said that being attacked by him was like being savaged by a dead sheep, but he proved Healey wrong in his resignation speech.
Well, he said in return that being attacked by Denis Healey was like being muzzled by an old boar. The two of them actually got on rather well. I mean, they're contrasting characters, but both actually thoroughly nice guys. Denis, a rather noisy bully when he got carried away. Geoffrey, quiet, very reserved, very courteous. It was his use of words, it was his steely mind and his forensic skill that he employed. But the two of them got on very well. They were both very serious, heavyweight politicians, both of whom determined to do what they thought was the right thing to do in a difficult party context in both places. And going back to what Michael was saying, Geoffrey's whole point was free market economics with a social conscience. And actually, his social conscience meant he'd got to get rid of hyperinflation. He'd got to get rid of the ludicrous process of throwing money at every difficult problem and taking the easy way out. And it was when it was a few years after he'd done the difficult things, you saw the product of it, that you appreciated just what he'd achieved, and the benefit of that went to the ordinary working people of the country.
Lord Heseltine, should he have stood up to Margaret Thatcher more when he was still in her cabinet?
Well, I think he did all the time, and but what he didn't do was go to the press and tell people he was doing it. I remember vividly in, I think it was 1981, maybe a little later, a meeting at Chequers in which Margaret was conducting her usual view about Europe, and Geoffrey argued firmly, Ken rightly said, quietly, persistently, logically, and as a result of that, Margaret wrote one of the most all-embracing European letters to Chancellor Cole and President Mitterrand that you could design. Geoffrey did stand up to her. That was half the problem.
Lord Heseltine and Ken and Clark, thanks both very much indeed. It's 18 minutes past 5, listening to Saturday PM, and Turkey has declared 3 days of national mourning after 2 powerful bomb blasts in the capital, Ankara, this morning turned a peace rally into a massacre. At least 86 people have been killed in what is the deadliest bombing on Turkish soil. No one has yet claimed responsibility. Our correspondent there is Mark Lowen.
Thank you, Glenn, and hello from Turkey on a very dark day when this country has suffered its worst ever
Okay, we'll try
through
to...
a crowd gathered to protest for peace and an end to the violence between the Turkish government and the PKK Kurdish militia. At least 86 people were killed, 186 wounded. This man witnessed the blasts.
There was so many people lying on the ground and so many body parts everywhere, blood everywhere. There was no ambulance around half an hour, 40 minutes. We started to have to injure people to take hospital with buses and taxis.
There was the fear that an attack was on the cards. Since the ceasefire between the PKK and the state broke down in July, a deadly spiral of tit-for-tat violence has followed, amidst a frenzy of tension between Kurds and Turkish nationalists. Back in June, before an inconclusive election, the pro-Kurdish HDP party was bombed. Now, ahead of an election rerun, there was the widespread feeling that something dangerous was coming. The Prime Minister convened an urgent security meeting before addressing the nation.
These are difficult days, and we need unity and solidarity more than ever. Unfortunately, today in Ankara, whatever their political ideology is and whoever they support, these people were enjoying their right to demonstration and peaceful march. Our government and all our units are and will be in full determination to fight against such kind of terrorism.
But anger is building among the pro-Kurdish HDP party and its supporters, the party leader pointing the finger of blame at the government. There is often talk here of a deep state, nationalist elements that either collude with or support successive governments. They've struck before. The leader of the main opposition party, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, expressed the outrage across the political spectrum.
The numbers of casualties that we are hearing are very dramatic. I don't want to give any figures now, but it's a very tragic picture. We're hearing that there were 2 suicide bombers. We would like to know the truth. I don't want to blame anyone in particular today, but of course we have to underline something. Is this how a country is being ruled? We can live together peacefully in this country.
And so Turkey, the West's vital ally in the Middle East, plunges further into chaos. Can an election now be held in 3 weeks' time? And can this deeply wounded, polarised society come together in the face of tragedy? Glenn.
Thanks, Mark. Mark Lowen in Turkey. Well, Gareth Stansfield is Professor of Middle East Politics at the University of Exeter and co-editor of a new book, The Kurdish Question Revisited. We're hearing blame and counter-blame after these attacks, Professor, but who do you think is most likely to be responsible and why?
That's the million-dollar question with this. There's a great amount of suspicion in Turkey and animosity